We seem to be missing Rabbi K.
I see.
Oh, sorry, I don't
Right.
know if Rabbi Keith's going to be joining today, as it's
Yeah.
his day off and he wasn't feeling too well.
I see. Okay.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So it's 12 o'clock. Whoops. Let's get started. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Holy Blossom Israel Dialogues. We have a wonderful program today with our old friend Gabby Ben-Dor, and I hope we're doing a formatting a little different. David DeWitt will explain that all to you, and we'll hopefully have some good questions from the audience as we go. So, David, I'll hand it over to you, and you can get us started.
Thanks very much, Les, and welcome to everyone. It's a real pleasure, as it always is, when we have the opportunity to have Gabi with us. He's well known to many, especially those who are members of Holy Blossom, where he has spoken quite regularly over the many years. And it's one of my great pleasures to see that because Gabi and I have both a personal and a professional relationship that goes back many, many years since he was a visiting scholar at York University and at the center I then directed, which led us to do two book projects together. One on conflict management in the Middle East and one on confidence and security building measures in the Middle East. And those were done in the late 80s, early 90s. And I dare say if we went back and attempted to do a similar kind of project now, many of the questions that we'd be asking would be quite similar, but many of the answers quite different. And that's one of the realities we're going to try and address in today's session. For those of you who are seeing Gabi only for the first time, let me remind you or tell you that he is a senior professor of political science at the University of Haifa in Israel. He did his undergraduate and graduate studies in the United States with his PhD at Princeton. He's held many senior positions in his university, including chairman of his department. And if I remember correctly, he was at one time provost of the university. Uh, he's also been the director of the of great graduate studies at the National Defense College, which is the highest course that is offered for officers in the IDF. Uh, and he's called upon by universities and often other organizations worldwide to provide his expertise on assessing international politics with particular reference to the Middle East. I would add that while I've known Gabi in terms of work on international politics and regional security in the Middle East, he's also known about by Middle East scholars for his earlier work on the Druze and on some issues of domestic politics, both in Israel and in the Arab world. So there's much for us to learn from a conversation with Gabi. And what we're going to do this time, rather than as is so often the case, where our guest starts off with a major, often PowerPoint assisted presentation, this is going to be a conversation where Gabi and I are going to have a discussion, something we do quite regularly on our own, but this time in a shared environment. And after a little while, then Mark and Les and anyone else who's able to join us um, will participate, and we hope that many of you will write in questions. And we have the Q&A, and so please make sure you use the Q&A to propose questions. And I think that John Allen is about to join us from beautiful BC and Vancouver, correct? So it's good to see you, John. So, Gabi, let's just start with trying to think through what it really means in, I guess, in the most general terms, um, about this notion of a new and uncertain regional strategic environment. I mean, that's the title that we gave this session. And it certainly strikes me that if we had been talking about this before October 7th, we would have started off by saying there are some um, realities that are incrementally changing, and then there's the uncertainty that is always there. Um, there's the uncertainty of domestic interests, whether it's domestic politics in Israel and how that affects diplomatic and military options. There's the uncertainties that emerge from Islamic politics within critical states. And of course, there's the uncertainty that emerges from non-state actors. Um, and yet, within all that, we used to talk about a sense of predictability. We knew that Israel focused on having a strong deterrent because it saw its principal enemies in terms of states. And states, there's a pretty straightforward way of calculating effective deterrence, deterrence dominance. October 7th challenged that in terms of the vulnerability of Israel to a non-state actor and how it drew Israel in, and how it mobilized many other parts of the Arab world. So the notion of deterrence, which seemed to provide a sense of certainty, I'm not suggesting it unraveled, but to what extent has deterrence now really been changed? Initially, I thought perhaps it'd be fundamentally weakened because of the vulnerability. Now, the arguments I hear is that Israel has regained deterrence dominance by showing how it can deal with the missile attacks, the drone attacks, how it has intervened against the Hezbollah in Lebanon, how it participated in what ended up being an overthrow of the Assad regime in Syria, how it, with allies, was able to deal with the attack from Iran. In terms of the regional strategic environment, what do you think about this notion of deterrence? Is it still as applicable? Has Israel reasserted this sense of confidence in its deterrent capability? And do you think that is an accurate calculation?
I think deterrence is still here, a very important notion, but it has been overemphasized by Israel. It's better to go back to the basics of thinking about the use of force. As we learned from the classics, from Clausewitz and others, the thing to do is to plan to use your military force, not only for deterrence, but for creating a better, a more stable, and more amicable strategic and political environment. So when you use military force, you should always see the end game in sight and make sure that the ends and the means are compatible. So deterrence is okay as far as it goes in historical terms, but I think it's using much of its usefulness in the light of the changing political order in the region, which you and I have investigated for so long. Actually, I think one of the things that the Hamas people had in mind when they initiated that vicious attack on October the 7th was precisely to subvert this sort of course of history which showed us a different moral, a different Middle East, one in which there would be a sense of reconciliation, the Abraham Accords would be expanded, Saudi Arabia would join in, there would be a new relationship between Israel and the major strategic partners it can seek in the region. And Hamas has been partially successful, unfortunately, in that. As far as deterrence goes itself, and I don't want to limit the discussion to deterrence, but as far as deterrence goes, As you indicated, David, today and in many of other previous discussions, you have to differentiate between the various fronts on which we've been fighting. Deterrence has been more than reestablished, has been enhanced on the east and the north. Actually, if you are asking who is winning the war, I'm getting back to my literary experience reading Dickens and The Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. In terms of what's happening in the north and the east, it's the best of times. We have beaten Hezbollah pretty decisively. There seems to be a new order emerging in Lebanon, which will police Hezbollah more efficiently than we ever could hope. Our ancient enemy Syria has gone bankrupt completely. Syria has been taken out of the axis of the rogue states threatening us for the moment. Iran has been weakened, has been partially even humiliated, if you are talking about deterrence, and it's wide open now for an attack if anybody wants to attack, and so on and so forth. But we haven't really won the war decisively against Hamas. We haven't been able to release the hostages. And I think that the future of the Gaza Strip is very much in question still today. So yes, it's been the best of times if you are talking about reestablishing deterrence in the north. It's been the worst of times in terms of the consequences of October the 7th. We have not finished the war. We have not uprooted Hamas. We have not released the hostages. We have not settled the differences within Israeli society. Cleavages are all over, and bad things are happening. But just to end this very short response to my question, David, I want to point to something which probably all of you have missed because you are not interested in it. There is a popular song contest in Europe called Eurovision. Now, there was a contest a couple of weeks ago, and this is important for the publics in Israel and Europe. And the surprising result was that our singer was second. Now, how does that contest work? There are judges who are professionals from every one of the 28 countries participating, and then people are voting at home. Okay? Masses of the people, public opinion, if you wish. So in terms of the judges, we came out 7th or 9th, I think. In terms of the public, guess, we were number 1. So somebody still likes Israel and appreciates Israel. And the picture you get of everybody in Europe ganging up on Israel because we are doing such terrible things to the hungry children in Gaza is not quite the correct one, not quite the accurate one. So there are also good things happening in other fronts. And once again, I think that the general picture, therefore, is confusing. As King Lear said in Shakespeare's famous play, confusion is king. It's not clear who is winning and on what front and what the future will bring. One thing I can say, that one of the major failures of Israel has been to underestimate the time effect. A lengthy war was never a part of our doctrine, national security doctrine. A never-ending war was never something we planned for. It's not something that Israeli society can adapt to very quickly. Let me mention another very close friend of mine, David, with whom I have been discussing such matters, who is probably in attendance today. This is my friend Steve Posen, a very well-known lawyer in Toronto, with whom and with whose family I've been on friendly terms for many, many years. And Steve and I decided right after the attack, when we had daily discussions, that Israel had a window of opportunity, the length of which was 3 weeks. And whatever Israel could not accomplish in 3 weeks, it was not likely to accomplish ever in the future. I think that was not a bad prediction. If we had done the right things in the first 3 weeks, a massive military attack, trying to surprise and just uproot Hamas decisively very early, with a coherent political plan of what will happen in the Strip after that, we would have come out right. We failed to do either. We didn't launch a decisive military attack, and we didn't come up with a coherent political plan, exploiting the possible military victory. And this is why we are behind the times. We keep trying to make up for time lost all the time. And I don't think there is any more time to lose now. So I think there are some very hard decisions to be made It is literally in the next couple of weeks.
So let me pick up on your last comment. Strategic plan.
Yes.
We've heard that over and over from Israelis, from other commentators, analysts, academics, and politicians, and even military people about questioning what is the strategic plan. It's
Yes.
one thing to launch tactical operations, perhaps could have been supported by more effective international diplomacy. But what is the strategic plan? Is there an articulation that Israelis understand, that they're confident in? It doesn't seem that it's evident.
It is not evident, and I'm not even sure it exists. At least it has not existed until very recently. Right now, for the first time in 600 days, it's 600 days today, less today, that October 7th was launched. For the first time, we can see something a little bit more creative in the Gaza Strip from the Israeli side, namely these little humanitarian islands in which food is distributed by an American company, taking it away from Hamas. Just trying to detach Hamas from the people and trying to tell the people, if you have a problem, you have an address you can approach and from which you will be assisted effectively. If that works, if we get a picture in which Americans distribute humanitarian aid and not Hamas, then that's a revolution of sorts in what is happening. And then you can speak about the future of the Gaza Strips, because what is the problem? We can come up with any number of plans who will administer the Gaza Strip, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan, all of it is fine. But none of them will be able to govern Gaza until Hamas is taken out of the picture. And who will take Hamas out of the picture? Only we can do that, and we have to do it very quickly, very decisively, while cultivating these humanitarian islands, which are Hamas-free, but which are not under Israeli occupation. There is no future for Israeli occupation in the Gaza Strip in the long run. We have had it before. We have given it up with good reasons. And I think other people should administer the Gaza Strip. Actually, we shouldn't care who administers the Gaza Strip as long as it is not Hamas. And I think for the first time in 600 days, we have seen a few small steps in that direction. And it's too early to judge how successful these attempts have been.
Is in your view, is there support for that kind of activity within the Israeli public, to have non-Israeli actors becoming immersed in Gaza, delivering humanitarian aid, providing the personal security that is required to deal with the civilian population? Because the view from the outside is that, yes, there's a dominant majority in Israel that certainly focuses on getting the hostages back. They recognize that's linked likely to a ceasefire. They, to some extent, are recognizing the humanitarian costs that have been accruing in Hamas, in Gaza. But there seems not to be a clear sense of who's going to be responsible for security, to not only allow the humanitarian aid to be delivered and the civilians in Gaza to access it, but how do you do that with the intent of still trying to destroy the remnants of Hamas?
Well, the plan is not entirely clear, but my sense of it is as follows. The present operation is intended to capture large chunks of territory and hang onto them for a long time in the foreseeable future, so to speak, and tell the people in Gaza that, so they don't think that if they cooperate with the new regime emerging there, they will be punished the week after when Israel withdraws. So Israel plans to stay there for a while and to turn these places into humanitarian islands where aid will be administered, not by Hamas and not by the UN, which is seen as hostile to Israel, heavily penetrated by Hamas, but American companies, okay, private security firms, private contractors, and so on and so forth. Everybody at the moment trusts the Americans to do the job. And once you have these Hamas-free islands, then it's a different ballgame. Then you have a new regime in which you are taking away from Hamas its most important weapons, which is the distribution of aid. Let me tell you a story, all of you. A couple of days ago, Hamas sensed that something is changing for the worse, and people are going to a different sort of sovereign to be fed. They don't depend on Hamas. So then Hamas said, now don't go there. Okay, we will open our storage rooms, okay, our warehouses, where food is stored for you, and you go there. So all of a sudden, there seems to be a lot of food going around Gaza, when Hamas believes that it is in its interest to do so. So is there famine in Gaza? Certainly there is a shortage of food. But a mass famine, which cannot be avoided, I don't think so. I think Hamas is a big part of creating that kind of famine for its own political purposes. And that's the political game to which we have not paid sufficient attention in Israel. This is where the future will be decided, because the military operations come and go. How do you perpetuate gains from these military operations? By creating a new political order which is viable in terms of the wishes of everybody who's involved. And only now, I think, is it dawning upon decision makers in Israel that this is the way to go, which is unbelievable. Where have you been for 600 days?
Yeah.
I really don't know. Let me throw in yet another. I'm not sure it's a variable in social science terms, but another kind of factor playing a huge role, which is the enigmatic personality of the President of the United States, who is playing a decisive role in everything that's happening in the Middle East. Nobody knows where he's going and what he really wants, or what his limits are or red lines are. He says one thing and it's opposite, but he's the one who calls the shots. He is the one who speaks about the future of Syria. He is the one who addresses the Iranian nuclear program. He is the one who talks to the emerging regional powers in the Gulf. He is the one who has some dreams, pipe dreams maybe, but dreams about Gaza, who thinks unconventionally about the future. And I think an awful lot depends on him. And nobody can figure out where he's actually going. I mean, is he going to turn Gaza into a Riviera, or is he going to make some kind of a peace agreement with Hamas, or anything in between is possible? So we keep getting surprised by his moves. By we, I mean everybody: Israel, Hamas, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, everybody in between. But at least he's addressing the big issues. Let me give you an example. We spoke about Syria, a very important country, which has been the bridge between Hezbollah and Iran. And that bridge has collapsed. I mean, we made it collapsible, and it collapsed. And now what's going to happen with the future of Syria? We have built a security zone of sorts in the south. The Turks have built a security zone of sorts in the north. And now comes the president of the United States, and he says, well, Erdogan, the president of Turkey, is a very good friend of mine, an excellent person. I also have an excellent relationship with Bibi. So let's talk about the future of Syria. Well, I think that we should not miss the opportunity to build a new country there, which would be a peaceable country, a peaceful country, one which would contribute to peaceful coexistence. That is possible, but it should be addressed. And so I think that Trump is pushing Israel and Turkey to talk about this. He's pushing the Syrians, the new regime, to talk to Israel about this. That's a creative set of moves, which I appreciate personally.
Right. So let's continue for a second on that. And then John or Mark, Les, want to jump in, please. About these external, both regional and external actors. You mentioned both the Americans and the Saudis,
Yes.
among others. I mean, one of the concerns that has been raised by many is that it seemed that Trump and the Saudis had entered into some very serious negotiations, discussions on a whole range of issues. from military technology, military procurement, AI investment, large businesses, Saudi investment in the United States, and so forth. And much of this um, has had in the shadows this question of how would that be turned into getting the Saudis to join in with the so-called regional normalization relations with Israel. Um, and then at the boundaries of this is the question, what happened to the using this as leverage about around a Palestinian state, the future of Israel-Palestine relations? That seems to have gone away from the center of the Trump Saudi initiative. We don't read or hear much about that as a condition. And we don't hear much about Saudi Israel other than the Saudis will reconsider once the Gaza situation uh, ceases. Do you have
Well,
any
yes.
insight or sense of what's happening there?
Yes. I mean, I think that Saudis are getting everything that they are hoping to get from the relationship with both Israel and the US without normalization.
Right.
They wanted Iran, weakened and humiliated a bit, and they got it. They wanted a close relationship with the US administration, investment, weapons, perhaps atomic energy for peaceful. They are getting all of that without really making peace with Israel. And even Israel doesn't insist on it too loudly because it's not in the cards. It doesn't make sense from Saudi point of view to attach themselves to that kind of a liability as long as the war is on. A lengthy 600-day war in which Israel doesn't win a decisive victory makes Israel a liability for the Saudis in the public realm. And that's a truth, and it has to be admitted. By the way, same for President Trump. Trump likes to make deals, and he likes winners. I mean, he's a student of the legendary Vince Lombardi. Okay, winning is not the most important thing; it's the only thing. He wants us to win quickly, put an end to the war, and then we won't be a liability anymore. Then we will accompany him in his triumphal march throughout the deserts of the Middle East, making money for the United States for the next 20 years. We are unable to do it with this kind of liability on our shoulders, a war which we cannot end and which we cannot conclude with a decisive victory and with a political future which is acceptable to our possible partners in the future. That's a very big factor, I think, and should be in the thinking of the people who make decisions, because if they want the new regional order, they have to make a contribution to it. And the contribution to it should be twofold: quickly ending the war in the Gaza Strip, and second, putting an end to the bad things happening there in very close cooperation with the regimes interested in stabilizing the regional order.
Do you think, and then let me invite our colleagues, but do you think the fact that the government that Israel has at the moment, which seems to be doing whatever is possible to undermine any sense that there is a possibility of a Palestinian state, is that concern is really contributing in very significant ways to just allowing and encouraging the Americans to continue their relationship, deepening their relationship with the Saudis, playing with the Turks in terms of Syria. And of course, Turkey is an important NATO ally. Uh, that the politics are such that for many of us who were thinking long term and saying if there's going to be long term peace and security for Israel, there has to be a resolution to the Palestinian question. This has now been pushed aside, that it's turned out in a cruelly ironic way to benefit those on the right in the Israeli political scene, hampering any further serious consideration of how to resolve the issue of Israel Palestine?
I'm not sure anymore about who is right and who is left in Israel. If you are counting all those against a Palestinian state in the very near future right wing, then 2/3 of the Israeli public, or
Yes.
75%, are right wing. And not because they deny the plausibility of the idea altogether, but because they feel that if the outcome of the aftermath of the war of October 7th, 2023, is a prize and award to Hamas, saying, okay, you attacked us, there was no Palestinian state. Now that you have attacked us, we accept a Palestinian state. That would be a horrible outcome from the Israeli point of view and from the point of view of everybody who is against radicalism in the Middle East. So I think, yes, the Palestinian question should be addressed, and I think the Palestinian state should not be ruled out as a possibility. And I think that was the idea before October the 7th, when Israel and Saudi Arabia were working on a formula saying that, yes, there will be normalization. And within normalization, the question of the future of the Palestinians will be addressed between the two countries. And the idea of the Palestinian state should also be on the table, something to be discussed. That's okay. You can discuss it and you can make progress towards it in the future. But at the moment, okay, to award the Palestinians with a state because they attacked Israel murderously on October the 7th would be an unacceptable outcome for the vast majority of the Israeli public. And with all due respect to the importance that you people here always attach to Smotrich and Ben-Gvir and so on, they are very small players in this game. And I think that if you take also those who are on the liberal wing of Israel, Gantz, Lapid, and so on, none of them is in favor of a Palestinian state at the moment. At the same time, I think that Israel should make progress on this. Let me give you an example of what I have in mind, and perhaps I will conclude so others can join in more fruitfully, perhaps. The Abraham Accords, okay, the opening shot of the normalization process, right, David? What happened? Israel was about to annex a good part of the West Bank, Area C, which is 70% of the West Bank. Actually, the legislation already started and the law was on the table. And then there came the Arabs and rightly said, okay, so what's in it for us? I mean, we want something for the Palestinians, and if we can't deliver these goods, we cannot enter the agreement. So then Israel, with a very similar government headed by Netanyahu, admittedly without Smotrich and so on, said, okay, we won't annex, not because we don't think we have a historical right to the area, but because we want to make progress on normalization. So I think you have to pay your price. And in that sense, I think that most Israelis would be willing to pay their price. But I think a Palestinian state imminently to be established under the circumstances would be very difficult. Who will lead such a state? I mean, the majority of the Palestinian public, look at every public opinion poll conducted by Dr. Khalil Shkaki, a good friend of mine. The only reputable pollster in the Arab world says that 70% of the Palestinians believe Hamas should lead the state. 75% of them believe that October 7th was fully justified, and so on and so forth. I mean, you want to give these people, the key to the government in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip? Obviously, it's a long process. I think we should make a contribution to the process, but we should not rush the process before there's a mature Palestinian political public which is capable of electing and following a responsible government, which is not now a possibility.
John, Mark, Les? Okay. Mark.
Gabby, thanks again for your insights, and David for your insights as well. It's been, as always, very instructive. Gabby, can you say a bit more about the role of the U.S. administration going forward? I know that there's a great deal of uncertainty given the U.S. president's proclivity to change his mind almost every 24 hours. But what would it, from an Israeli perspective, what would be a sort of an ideal scenario at least in the short term.
Well, an ideal scenario would be a full agreement between the president of the US and the Israeli government on giving Israel unlimited time and unlimited freedom in finishing up the Gaza business sometime in the next few months or so. Secondly, a very harsh attitude to Iran and not agreeing to anything resembling the 2015 JCPOA agreement. And three, an American administration which would cooperate with Israel militarily over the Middle East, for example, for taking out the Houthis in the Yemen, who are threatening Israeli security daily and are threatening air transportation to Israel really daily. All of you who travel to Israel must have seen the impact of this already. This is not going to happen, obviously. I think Mr. Trump basically, I think, is a man who has warm emotions towards Israel and the Jews. After all, he has Jewish grandchildren and so on. And I think he genuinely wishes to see Israel secure and prosper. But he has his own game plan, which is very different from that of Netanyahu. And obviously, on the issues I have mentioned, he's far away from the views of the Israeli government. I think he's going to conclude a deal with the Iranians, which might be apparently more sexy to the American public, but will not be all that different from what Mr. Obama concluded in 2015. I think he fought the Houthis for a few days and then decided that he had won and left the scene. I can speak more on this, by the way. It was not a good American operation, to say the least. And one of the reasons that he quit the operation was not that he had won the war, but because he found it too costly. But in any case, he said, I got what I wanted. The Houthis, who are nice guys, basically, promised not to attack American ships. I'm the president of the United States. I have won. What about the rest of the world? What about Egypt? What about Israel? Nothing doing, okay? He also, I think, did something that the Biden administration never did, which is talk directly to Hamas. Witkoff and his deputies have been speaking to Hamas quite openly. And here too, he made a distinction. He made a huge effort to get the one hostage who was an American citizen, dual Israeli-American citizens, released. And he had promised that if the others are not released, all hell would break loose. They were not released, and nothing broke loose, except maybe something in his head, if I wanted to be vicious about this, but I don't. So I think that it's not just a matter of inconsistency, it's a matter of setting goals which are basically incompatible with political reality, and then abandoning them with all kinds of slogans which make very little sense, okay? We have won the war in the Yemen, so we are going home, fine. We are talking to the president of Syria because he's a nice guy. He's a fighter, he's a mensch, he's fine. The Iranians, we are making excellent progress. What is the progress? Show us. There isn't any on the one major point that they disagree on, and where everybody disagreed with the Iranians always in the past, which was enriching uranium. There is no progress, but he says, we are talking, okay. So we are back to his personality. As a winner, he wants to make deals. He wants winners. He wants to conclude everything quickly. He's impatient with lengthy processes. And again, the Israeli idea of fighting 600-day wars without a clear conclusion doesn't go well with Mr. Trump. And I think that the longer the war drags on, the worse the relations will be with the United States. And soon they will resemble the kind of tension we used to have with Mr. Biden in the White House.
John?
Thanks. So, Gabby, you just described a rather difficult relationship with Trump. Canada has its own difficult relationship. Everybody else does too. So that's not unusual, but it is a bit unusual vis-a-vis Israel. But even before the announcements today about expansion of the West Bank settlements, you had Canada, France, and the UK make a quite significant statement about what Israel was doing in Gaza and the West Bank. And then you had the Germans, which normally your biggest ally, and the Italians joining in, the EU threatening to at least stop the negotiations on the expansion of their free trade agreement. And I would expect that after today, announcements by your defense minister, your minister of finance, and your minister of security, you can minimize the fact that they're right-wing ministers, but they are three of the key ministers in the government, an announcement that basically says we're going to put 22 new settlements into the West Bank. And the purpose of it is to prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state. I would suggest that Israel is closer to having sanctions imposed on it than it's ever been. And I think it's almost inevitable that France, the UK, and Canada will. It'll be interesting to see whether others do. So on the one hand, strategically, Israel's in one of the best shapes it's ever been, apart from Gaza. And on the other hand, it's exposing itself to criticism that we haven't seen in a long time. You can dismiss the West as being naive, etc., but the reality is that sanctions may be on the way. Trade sanctions, weapon sanctions, etc. So, I'm not so sanguine about Israel's position right now.
Well, first of all, I'm not representing the Israeli government, any of the ministers you've mentioned, or any other minister. I'm an analyst trying to show some insights which might facilitate more sophisticated thinking about these issues. So what do you want me to say? Obviously, establishing new settlements at this moment is not a good idea, not something I would do. But it's a game being played. I mean, what these ministers are telling the Europeans, you want to push for a Palestinian state, we will punish you by these settlements, which then will prevent the Palestinian state you want to establish. The right thing to do is to get back to talking to each other as friends, which we used to be, Western European liberal democracies and Israel. And you tell us what you want us to do and what you think we're doing wrong. We'll discuss it and we'll see. And yes, the Europeans are naive. I think they are very one-sided. As I've mentioned in my analysis, so to speak, of the Eurovision Song Contest, the European public is not very supportive of these moves of the various governments, I don't think. Some of the intellectuals are, and the journalists and the artists, but I think the people in the street are not very happy with the governments in Europe taking steps which are interpreted around much of the world as supporting Hamas more than supporting Israel. I think also that the Europeans know that whatever they do is not going to count for that much because all the keys are in the hands of the President of the United States. Nobody is going to attribute a great deal of importance to what the German Chancellor is going to say or do, even though there is, as you've mentioned quite rightly, a very strong and close relationship between Germany and Israel. By the way, Germany has not followed the initiative of the French and the Canadians as yet. The Chancellor immediately said he's going to talk to Netanyahu and the Israelis because he's worried, which he should be. And I think it's good for us to talk. Let me say something nasty because I feel a little bit energetic tonight. Tonight in Israel, noon for you in Canada. Europe is a dying continent. I've just seen the latest statistics shown by the OECD, which show that there is not, listen carefully, not a single European country which has a birth rate high enough to perpetuate the population. Not a single one. And most of them are losing population so quickly that the reduction in the workforce is inevitable, and therefore they will have to keep importing people from abroad. And the societies are changing very quickly under this kind of pressure. Even the countries which have something less than a disastrous rate of birth, such as France, have that rate of birth because they have a very large Muslim minority already, which raises the birth rate. But as to the French as such, the non-Muslim French, the country is shrinking, as is Spain, as is the UK, as is Germany, and so on and so forth. So I think the Europeans are showing by the low birth rate that they have lost their faith in themselves, in their future, their pride in their countries. They are uncertain about their own future. and their intellectual elites is following this kind of woke fashion of blaming themselves and everybody else who is close to them, like Israel, for their colonial misdeeds of hundreds of years ago and dozens of years ago. And not many of these European leaders actually look at the issues as such and say, okay, the Israelis have perhaps done a little bit too much of this or that, but they are cultivating very simplistic slogans. Also, they are very, very inconsistent on this. Let me give you one example. The French president, Monsieur Macron. At one point, he was asked what his view is on the European Court, on the International Court of Justice in The Hague, and it's arrest warrants against Netanyahu and such. And he said, of course, we respect international law and follow the rulings of the court. 2 weeks later, he was asked once again, and he said, we will follow international law very closely, but as it happens, Israel was not a signatory to the Rome agreements establishing the court. Therefore, the court has no jurisdiction over Israel. What happened in these 2 weeks? Something very simple happened. There was a negotiating process launched about the future of Lebanon. The French have a vested interest in Lebanon because of their colonial past and ties to the Lebanese Christian population, which is a very large minority there. So the French wanted to be part of the process, to which Israel replied, thanks, but no thanks. I mean, you want to arrest our prime minister and you want to be part of a peace process? No thanks. So the French the French president said, okay, what if we take a somewhat different attitude on the issue of the International Court of Justice? And then we said, in that case, the future of Lebanon is open for negotiation. So yes, I mean, there's a lot of hypocrisy, a lot of shallowness, a lot of cheap kind of, shots taken at each other. And I'm very disappointed in that. Having said all this, if your question is, what do you think of establishing 22 new settlements in the West Bank? My answer is it's a bad idea, and I wouldn't do it.
I would just respond to a couple of things. The EU may be having a demographic problem, and I think the West in general is. I'm not sure it's because countries have lost faith in themselves, but there are lots of reasons for it. But the EU is Israel's largest trading partner. And you do have very significant research and innovation agreements with the EU, which I think are very important to Israeli universities. So, I mean, if there is a response from individual countries or from the EU, it could have an impact. The other thing, just on Eurovision, I think you might want to be careful because some of the analysis says the reason they won the popular vote, that the Israeli won the popular vote, is because Jews around the world voted in huge numbers, not Europeans, not just the average individual who loved the song, but Jews around the world who wanted to show support for Israel in its tough times and when their singer was being discriminated against. So I'm not necessarily sure that's an indication that the world loves Israel. At least I wouldn't necessarily take that to heart.
Well, if indeed somebody can prove to me that the Jews still enjoy such kind of huge power all around the world, I would be very happy to be convinced of that. I haven't really seen data on this. It is probably true that many Jews decide that it's a good idea to vote for Israel given the discrimination against the singer. So, yeah. But they were able to get it through the public. And the public, the European publics did not feel like voting against the singer. So, I mean, you can interpret in a variety of ways, but whatever way you choose, it has to be a hopeful one. It's a good thing that happened to Israel, even in Europe. I agree with you that the relationship with the EU is very important, not just because of trade, but because of many other factors that you have mentioned, scientific agreement. But beyond that, there is a sort of an ideological issue as well. I mean, we are an example of the kind of Western European liberal democracy, which used to be all the rage. And I think we should belong to that kind of a family. And I think we should talk to people who are members of our family. And to me, as a liberal Democrat, small l, small d, it is important what my fellow Germans or British or Spanish counterparts think. but I don't think we should give in to their political fashions too easily. By the way, I also make a distinction between the EU as an institution, which I respect very much, and the various European countries. The European countries speaking now individually, okay, UK, France, and so on, and other European countries, you may not attribute great importance to them, like Czech Republic, Hungary, and so on, are very much against these steps against Israel. And as you know, in the EU Council, you have to be in a situation where you enjoy a unanimous vote. And I don't think they're going to get that. So not all is lost. But I think we are just arguing because we are arguing, because we like arguing, you and I. But
Yeah.
we are on the same page. I think Europe is important. I think European wishes should be considered. European friends and allies should be cultivated and listened to. I'm very much in favor of that. I just don't think that things are as bad as they seem. Also because of a division of labor between Western Europe and the United States. The Western European countries know that basically Israel is the baby of the United States within the Western alliance. And I think whatever they say and proclaim is not all that important, even in their own eyes, because they know that only the United States makes a real difference in the process. So as long as we are more or less on the same page with the United States, we are okay on the diplomatic front. None of this is to indicate that I underestimate Europe and its importance. But I do disagree with you on one point, John. I do think that the declining birth rate is due to many factors, but one of them is that many of the old feelings of pride and optimism and identification with my country, my civilization are there. You can see examples of this in the rise of the new right wing in Europe, which tried to restore the old values, Brexit, and many other factors, which we could discuss this. But like I said, you and I have some differences, but basically, I think we are on the same page.
No, but I agree with you on that last point completely, but we're all facing that. You know, we had an economic crisis, we had COVID, there's lots of populism, there's lots of unhappiness in our societies. We're facing it in Canada too. It's a difficult time, and it breeds right-wing populist leaders like Mr. Orban and a few others and Mr. Trump. But yeah, I think you're right. We're often in agreement.
Good.
Les, you've been waiting patiently. Les, you're on mute.
Let me get, okay. Okay, I just want to go back to something that you said at the beginning. Oh, I thought you said when we were talking about Gaza, and you said that there should be a new political order there.
Yes.
And I wasn't clear what your view of that new political order is. So maybe you could.
There are several possibilities. I tell you what it should not be. It should not be under any kind of influence by Hamas. Hamas should be excluded completely. That's one. Secondly, it should not be run directly and exclusively by the PA, which is corrupt, which supports terrorism, which is barely able to govern parts of the West Bank, even with massive Israeli assistance. Anything else goes. I don't care if it's the Saudis or the Emiratis or the Egyptians or the Jordanians, a combination thereof, or the UN force, or an EU force, or whatever. As long as it's not Israel, Israel should go home. And I think the Hamas should be excluded, and the PA should not be given exclusive control over this. I think it still leaves a lot of room for instance, an inter-Arab force taking security seriously there, while allowing a technocratic government of economists and administrators to run the government. People like Salam Fayyad and people of his sort, who really want economic development, modernization, stability. There are quite a few Palestinians like this, and they are the ones who should run the government with the support of the moderate Arab countries, and of course, all the Western allies and partners who would like to be involved. There's plenty of creativity there.
I get that, but how likely is any of that?
Not okay, not likely as long as Hamas is able to resist forcefully. That's the key. Once we get rid of Hamas one way or another, either by beating them so decisively they're unable to resist, or as getting them to sort of abrogate their power, leave the country, go to exile, and agree to a demilitarization of the Strip, then I think the possibilities are open for these various options that we have discussed. As long as Hamas is there as a major power fighting physically anybody who wants to run the Gaza Strip, there is not going to be a new political order. So the Israeli military operation should be intended to create the possibility of that political order. There should be a close relationship between the political strategic moves and the geopolitical administrative moves. And this has not been the case for the past 600 days, unfortunately.
Exactly. I think that I was going to say it's been 601 days. What's going to change in terms of Hamas either being defeated or
Well,
disappearing?
Well, Hamas can be defeated. Look, I mean, much of Hamas leadership has been physically eliminated, okay? Many of the institutions of Hamas have been destroyed. And as I mentioned in my initial remarks, much of the territory has been taken away from Hamas. It no longer rules over pieces of land it used to run exclusively. I mean, that is changing. And I think if we continue that set of steps decisively, along with launching a political initiative and getting into the game the various political forces interested in securing stability for Gaza, reviving the good relationship we used to have with Egypt, for instance, which has deteriorated, talking more to the Jordanians, talking more to our friends in the Gulf, the Emirates and so on, and telling them what we are doing, okay? And explaining what we're doing and asking them what it is that you want us to do to enable you to run the Strip. That kind of close relationship should exist, and it hasn't. And I think that, like I said, these new humanitarian islands, aid administered by Americans, not Israelis, that's a change in a more hopeful future as far as I can judge.
Okay, I don't know. I'm pessimistic, looking at it pessimistically, but I'm not sure how that all will come about. Like in even in the short, in the short term or the long term, right?
So
What situations have to happen for some of those forces to come forward?
Okay, let's assume that Israel is able to occupy 60-70% of Gaza and make sure that in those parts of the Gaza Strip, there is no Hamas anymore. At least, I mean, there may be members of a Hamas party, but no Hamas terrorist holds a rifle in his hand, okay? And then Israel can say, this area is clean. It's not occupied by Hamas physically, militarily, and it's not administered by Hamas anymore because food, medicine, supplies, which are essential for the humanitarian needs of the population, are distributed by international factors, Americans, contractors, and whoever. And now, okay, now I think there is an open space for whoever wants to enter and create a political order. And then Israel would have to say, okay, right now we are ready to relinquish control, okay, and give up control to somebody else who has some kind of legitimacy in the region or in the world, be it an inter-Arab force, be it an international force, be it a UN force or whatever. But none of these forces will come in to fight Hamas. They will come in to administer an area which is free of Hamas. I can see the Egyptians and the Emiratis and the Jordanians running the Strip under these conditions. I cannot see them sending in military to fight Hamas. They won't. Nobody wants to fight Hamas. The only ones who can do that is our military, and it has to be done quickly and decisively because the war has dragged on for far too long, and we don't have that much time left. So I think what we will not accomplish in the next 2 months probably will be a big miss yet again, perpetuating the war for many more years, and that's something we cannot afford.
Mark, and then I want to turn to a couple of questions and encourage people to please send in a question on the Q&A. Mark?
So the terms quickly and decisively. Gabby, any insight as to why at this point, almost 2 years later, Israel has not been able to quickly and decisively eradicate Hamas? What have been the obstacles in this protracted war that have prevented it from cleaning out Gaza of Hamas?
What have been the obstacles? Well, one, that the Israeli military was not ready for a decisive operation, because in the last 10 years, the Israeli military has cultivated a culture that no more wars with decisive victories will be needed, because we will win the wars by technology, by using air force, by using rockets, by using our scientific capabilities from afar. So it had to take time to rebuild a military capable of fighting on the ground and winning. Secondly, the international environment was not conducive. We did not have enough munitions. We did not have enough supplies and equipment. And under the Biden administration, there were times when some of these supplies were discontinued by way of political pressure not to do the things that the administration didn't want us to do. Three, there was hesitancy on the part of the Israeli government in terms of not having a clear strategic vision for the future. So they did not tell the military what it is that they wanted. If I'm military, I want to know what I'm supposed to do. Am I supposed to occupy the entire Gaza Strip? Am I supposed to strike at certain centers of power? Am I supposed to assassinate the key leaders, or a combination of these? In what way? And I think that none of these situations have existed, and there have been all these issues. Now we have a new leadership in the military, a new chief of staff and a new set of officers who are somehow, I think, capable of pursuing a decisive military victory in the ground. That's one. Second, the Trump administration, with all the problems that we have already pointed out here, has not been exerting any pressure on Israel on the military front. It has provided all the supplies necessary. The relationship with the US military command is very close, so we are able to do the things that we couldn't before. And three, the Israeli government is slowly wake up to the need, which I pointed out, to have some kind of strategic vision, which is still blurred and fuzzy and only very partial. But there are all these new humanitarian islands, the idea of disconnecting Hamas from delivering the humanitarian assistance. There are some glimmerings of hope that the Israeli government sees some kind of strategic vision, which is achievable in the future, in the near future. So there are changes for the better. Having said that, as I said before, the entire Gaza situation, in my view, is a big failure compared to what we were able to accomplish in the north, where we took the initiative. We were tricky, we were unpredictable, we were full of surprises, and we were able to bring about, I think, a pretty decisive victory there. By any definition in military history, we won the war in the north and the east. But by the same definition, we are still short of victory in the south for the reasons I've mentioned. And I think that the more difficulties we face, the quicker we have to finish what we are doing. And likewise, the more the war drags on, the more we will see distance between Trump and Netanyahu, the more we will see the Europeans exerting pressure of the kind that John here has pointed out. And I think time is of the essence. That's something that the present government in Israel has either not realized, or else it has indeed fallen in love with the idea of a long war in which it will be able to rally the people behind the government, despite all the difficulties, despite all the cleavages. But this cannot continue anymore.
Thank you.
Okay. There are a couple of questions that I'll weave together from the Q&A. One simply asks, what about the Arab initiative that was a technocratic proposal? Why wouldn't Israel support that now?
The what? I'm sorry.
And the Arab initiative.
Which Arab initiative?
I'm assuming that the questioner refers to the earlier Saudi Arab initiative.
The 2002 initiative?
Yes, that long.
No, I think it's to the Egypt.
The Egypt one. Okay, that's not clear.
Initiative that was just announced that you'd get a technocratic government in there, along with some of the things that Gabby mentioned. I think that's what Barbara's referring to, if I'm
Okay.
not.
Okay, if that's a question, then the answer is very simple. I'm very much in favor of it. I'm in favor of a technocratic government. I'm in favor of Egyptian involvement in the future of the Gaza Strip, and I'm all for it. The question is, once again, is it feasible? Is it doable as long as Hamas holds so much military power in the Strip? I mean, will the technocratic government will not be toppled or threatened or coerced or blackmailed by tens of thousands of armed Hamas terrorists? So I think, yes, that's a vision which we can share. That's something we can strive for, to establish a technocratic government with Egyptian involvement. And I just want always to ask my Egyptian friends and partners, I mean, are you willing to launch this initiative as long as Hamas controls, I don't know, 40, 50% or whatever of the Gaza Strip? How will the technocratic government govern? Okay, with thousands of armed Hamas terrorists in the streets.
Okay, a second question that's just come up. It's a comment, but there's certainly a question in there as well by Arnold Englander. Gabi's position that Israel must successfully eliminate Hamas in at least a large part of Gaza cannot be disputed. However, the question is repeatedly raised of innocent Gazans being killed by bombs. Why does Israel not provide specific explanations as to the presence of Hamas at the sites of the bombings and that there is not a violation of international law?
The previous question was easy for me to answer and agree with. This one is hard to answer, but easy to agree with. I agree. We are doing a terrible job of explaining what we're doing and to show why these casualties, which are unfortunate, have been necessary, and why many of the data are distorted deliberately by Hamas and accepted without question by many reputable Western agencies and press outlets. And I think our government is doing a terrible job of explaining what it is doing, not only to you, Canadians or Westerners, but also to us, citizens of Israel. The Prime Minister has not had an open press conference more than, I think, twice in the entire 600-day period. Many of his ministers just, echo and parrot populistic statements of no particular importance. And these questions which come up of how many casualties, why are they necessary, why do they look so bad, what can we do to minimize them, and what are we doing to minimize them, and just how many casualties are there, really, not by the Hamas Ministry of Health, but by some objective agencies. These are not handled by the Israeli government at all, and if handled, they are handled badly. So I fully agree with the spirit of the question that we are in a very bad situation in that there are casualties. Many of these are unavoidable. Some of these are just tragic mistakes. These things happen in war. This has to be seen in comparison with other wars, particularly with other Western countries fighting terrorism. For example, take a look at the data of the United States fighting in Iraq, and take a look at the number of civilian casualties per population there compared to Gaza. And Gaza is more congested, more heavily armed, more tunnels, more difficulties. And there are actually fewer civilian casualties there than there were in Iraq. But nobody knows this. And nobody says this. Nobody explains it. Nobody analyzes this. Why? I don't know. Like I said, I don't speak for the government, and I cannot justify what it is. I don't want to justify what it is doing. And I think it's doing a terrible job of explaining what it is doing, particularly when it comes to casualties. Very, very bad.
So, Gabi, let's for a moment back out of the focus specifically on Israel and Gaza and go back to the notion of a regional strategic environment.
Yes.
We know that both before October 7th, but certainly continuing since, the Chinese and the Russians, to some extent the Indians, the Turks, have all been pursuing their diplomatic and specifically economic and strategic and technical interests in the region. They're all seeking out their own specific partners. they seem to be able to do that with some ease that they may now find more difficult with the Trump administration that is more forceful in the pursuit of its interests.
Okay.
What's your sense of these major external players? We've already mentioned a number of times Trump and the American strategic interests and the transactional nature of Trump's interests. But what about, for instance, Xi Jinping, that has become a focus for the Trump administration as its major area of concern, strategic concern?
I think that everything has changed since October the 7th. The Russians have been big losers in this game. For example, losing their strong foothold in Syria.
Yeah.
That's critical for them. Turkey and Israel actually are now sharing spheres of influence in Syria. But, I mean, things are changing so rapidly that we sometimes tend to lose sight of how dramatic they are. So here we have Israelis and Turks now coordinating things in Syria, so there are no unfortunate military clashes. They maybe used to have this sort of deconflicting mechanism with the Russians in the previous era. That's something new. We are actually talking to the Syrians directly also and see what it is that we can do about providing some kind of hospitable friend relationship in the future. We have a close relationship with India, which is even closer than it used to be. And the latest set of clashes between India and Pakistan has also changed Indian security perceptions and has brought them closer to Israel than before. At the same time, we have lost some of the very close relationship we used to have with China. China made a critical decision at one point after October 7th. Should it continue to cultivate the close relationship with Israel, or should it come out very, very cleanly and clearly and unequivocally on the Arab side? And it chose to do the latter. Still, trade between Israel and China is massive. My own university, which is not a major one, has 2 branches all over China. There's scientific cooperation, all kinds of diplomatic initiatives within the countries. So I think that things are not all that simple. There are a lot of so-called frenemies all over the area. Sometimes you cooperate, sometimes you clash, sometimes the relationship is very clandestine. But let me take you to the other part of the Middle East, the Gulf countries. Here you have the United Arab Emirates, which is competing with Saudi Arabia for influence and leadership in the moderate Arab world. And with that country, we have maintained a very close relationship throughout the war. There have been no diplomatic problems between the countries. The UAE has talked to Israel and continues to talk to Israel. And just getting back to my friend John in Europe, you may or may not know that we play basketball in the European League. And unfortunately, we cannot host the games in Israel because of the security situation. So our teams fly to Belgrade and Bucharest and places like that to host the European teams. And guess what the latest idea is? To host these countries in Dubai, which is close to Israel and which is hospitable to Israel. Unlike some of these French and Italian governments, no problem with the government in Dubai or Abu Dhabi, which continue to cultivate a good relationship with Israel, despite major disagreements over Gaza. But isn't that what friends are about? You have disagreements, you discuss them, okay? You tell the other guy, we disagree, you should not do this, but you don't disconnect the relationship. You don't say, we don't like you, therefore we're going to sanction you. Let's talk about this. And then the Abu Dhabians and so on and so forth are criticized by the Palestinians for maintaining the continued close relationship with Israel. What do they say? It's good for you, Palestinians. If you want to get something from the Israelis, we can get it from them because we talk to them, because it's worthwhile for the Israelis to give up something in order to maintain the good relationship with us. And I think that's the spirit of this sort of new regional order that you and I, David, have been discussing for what, 15 years or more?
Yeah.
Okay, and I think some of it exists in the form of relationship between Israel and the UAE. that's even better than Saudi Arabia, which continues to play, I think, a very difficult game with a lot of subterranean currents running around. But the UAE says openly, we have signed the Abraham Accords, we have an agreement with Israel, so we disagree with Israel on Gaza and the West Bank, and we'll talk to Israel and we'll push them to change their positions, and we make it very clear. But that doesn't mean that we have to abandon relationship with Israel because we disagree with them even on very major issues. To me, that's a hopeful sign. There has been a lot of pessimism here tonight, and many of you know me personally, and I'm an optimistic person by nature. And I think that despite all the difficulties, which are very, very serious, I think there are glimmerings of hope, and this is one of them. And I think we should cultivate that kind of hope. Getting back to the question of the Egyptian initiative, sure, we should, I think, respond positively, and we should talk to the Egyptians openly and say, how do you see this happening? What do you want us to do to make sure this happens? And what it is that you can contribute to make sure it happens?
So before I go to one more question, let me raise an actor that we haven't spoken about at all, that Israelis usually totally discount and others may, or while many of the world still holds in high regard and important, and that's the UN. And within the region, there's the Arab League. Here are two. One is a regional multilateral organization. The other is a global multilateral organization, both of which seem to be not serious players in
Yes.
the regional strategic environment or in securing peace.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as international relations scholars or former diplomats like John and Mark in his earlier career, we all had views of a liberal international order, a rules-based international order in which multilateral institutions, whether it be the global one or regional institutions, signified something very real and operationally sound, or at least optimistic in terms of coordination. Even if you didn't agree, you could discuss, you had a forum, you could come to certain kinds of conclusions and initiatives. The trauma of October 7th and thereafter, have you seen an impact? Can you trace where these two very different organizations, the UN and the Arab League, have or have not either been affected by it or have had any impact on what has happened since?
I think the impact has been largely negative in terms of these institutions. Actually, the UN has been sidelined almost completely. Take a look, for instance, in Lebanon, what happened. In Lebanon, in the previous round of fighting, 2006, the UN played a major role, okay, with the Security Council Resolution 1701, and later the strengthened UNIFIL force deployed in South Lebanon. That was to be the key. It was a complete failure. The UNIFIL force failed to enforce any kind of order in the South. The UN Security Council Resolution 1701 was completely disregarded and violated by everybody involved. And so in this round, the parties insisted on a tripartite committee running things, which is basically the US, France, as I mentioned before, and of course, the Lebanese government. A reinforced, revitalized Lebanese government and a reinforced and revitalized Lebanese army, which are supposed to ensure some kind of order in South Lebanon. By the way, they are doing a very decent job of that. It is very encouraging. And from the Israeli point of view, the less the UN is involved, the better. Take a look also at the other very important peace process, the most important one in the Middle East, Israel and Egypt, 1979. There is an international force supervising what's happening in the Sinai between these countries, but it's a multilateral force, MLF, which has nothing to do with the UN. Any number of countries contribute to it, from the United States to Fiji and everybody in between, if they are interested in supporting and promoting peace between Egypt and Israel. The UN as such doesn't exist in the equation. Where does it exist? in the Security Council. The Security Council resolutions are binding and biting sometimes. And when the parties want to make a step ahead, then they recall the resolutions 242 and 1701 and so on and so forth. So I think in the Security Council, there is some real debate, and there is some teeth involved in the resolutions eventually adopted. And that's why Israel relies so heavily on the veto by the US in the Security Council when all the chips are down. The UN as such, the General Assembly, its various institutions are politicized to an nth degree, in 99% of the cases biased against Israel. And I think there is no trust between Israel and these institutions whatsoever, and less than ever since 2023. But I think that other international institutions, such as the Multilateral Force in the Sinai, the Tripartite Committee in Lebanon, and so on and so forth, are still very important and should be. As for the Arab League, that's another institution which requires a unanimous decision on everything. And given the turmoil in the Arab world, it's just not possible. So when the Arab countries want to get something done, they get together in more limited forums. Okay, so the Egyptian, Jordanian, Saudis get together in a limited forum and launch an initiative. But if you want to get the Arab League behind it, you cannot get a unanimous decision because there is so much disagreement on the fundamentals in the Arab world. That might change in the future. But for the time being, as liberal Democrats who believe in the rule of law and international institutions, and so on and so forth, unfortunately, there hasn't been much progress. And let me add, as a theoretician, that what Mr. Trump is trying to do is to get an illiberal global order, which will ensure some stability, perhaps, and some predictability, but not the kind of rules-based institutional order that we used to believe in. Something altogether different. He just bypasses all the institutions inside the United States and outside the United States on the global scene. And if you are looking about the future of international institutions since World War II, then the future here is not very promising. I might just add that some of these institutions are themselves to blame. The UN, which was established as a coalition of the victorious nations against the Axis in World War II, has become something altogether different. It has become more like a protest movement of the third world against the old order, and it has completely lost sight of the original objectives of the institution, which is one reason for its decline.
There's one question that takes us back to Gaza that I think I'd like to ask, and then I'll invite John and Mark and Les if they have anything else to add before we run out of time. Alex Zisman reflects on the effectiveness of the distribution islands of humanitarian aid that has emerged recently. And his question is, do you think that Israel will try to stall the latest ceasefire initiatives to assess how effective this apparent weakening of Hamas has been? That as these aid centers have developed and the Gazan civilians search out support, humanitarian support through these and turn their backs on Hamas, whether this will continue?
I honestly don't know. I myself am a little bit more optimistic than I used to be, because there seem to be very many examples of genuine protest against Hamas in Gaza these days, something new, which we have not seen before. As for how well these humanitarian islands are working, it's too early to tell. It's been a matter of 2 or 3 days since this whole process was launched, and I don't think anybody can assess its success as yet. Is the Israeli government going to stall? I mean, I really don't know. I think that the latest proposal, I wanted to stay away from this kind of discussion.
Yeah,
which is journalistic. We don't know what's going to happen in an hour or two. But I think the latest initiative launched by Witkoff seems promising from the Israeli point of view, and Hamas seems to be a little bit unhappy, but has not rejected it out of hand as yet. And again, if you go back to the basics, if Hamas feels pressure, it feels that militarily it's losing still more, capabilities, and the population is unhappy with it more than ever, then it will be more willing to make an agreement along the lines of the Witkoff proposal. I think that's the game which is being played at the moment. Who is
Right.
exactly stalling and for how many days, I cannot really tell.
Thank you. Okay, Mark, anything further you'd like to raise right now?
I don't have anything further at this point.
Okay, John? No. Les,
No, I'm good.
we're good there. Well, Gabi, there are lots of things that I'd like to raise, but I don't think we have time. I mean, I'd like to go back and talk about our old thinking on the role of confidence and security building measures to create practical instruments to reduce this notion of threat and fear and open up opportunities of engagement.
I think that's a very good point, perhaps, to end this discussion on. As I said, most of the institutions have received blow after blow in the process, but one institution which has at least survived is the Abraham Accords. Okay, none of the parties have left or quit. None of the parties said, look, you guys are to blame, so we are not going to play anymore. And I've already mentioned the good relationship between Israel and the UAE within that framework as one example of exactly what you call confidence building measures. That the people there feel that it's better to show Israel that they care about Israel's security, they see Israel as a legitimate actor in the game, than criticizing it. Saying you are doing terrible things in Gaza is not enough. They are saying, we are saying it to you not as an enemy dedicated to your destruction, but as a good friend. Listen to us as friends because we want something good not only for the Gazans, but also for you, because we are on good terms and we have proven that. I mean, that's confidence building at its best. And I think it exists on all too narrow a platform, but it does exist. And the fact that it has not collapsed strengthens my more optimistic vision of the future, because if it's possible between Israel and the UAE or Israel and Bahrain, then why not in the future Israel and Saudi Arabia or Israel and Syria for that matter?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if we are able to expand that kind of institution, say the Abraham Accords, and get the Syrians to join and handle the problems of Israel between Israel and Syria within that framework, I think the future looks a lot more promising than otherwise it would.
Well, it's good to, and even if it's cautiously optimistic, to end that way, because we, of course, and Israel, without a doubt, are bombarded by negative messaging, horrible visions, pictures, statistics, which are dreadful. So having a sense that there is a tomorrow is significant. So thank you very much. It was, as always, a wonderful conversation. I'm glad we had the opportunity to share it with others. And I look forward to another one with you very soon. Though perhaps that'll just between us. Let me turn to Les on behalf of Holy Blossom.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Gabi. It's always such a pleasure to have you come to Holy Blossom in this way, or hopefully in person in the future, to hear what you have to say and really give us some ideas of what really is happening on the ground. So thank you again very much. Thank you to our panelists as well, David, John, and Mark. This is the last session of the spring version of Israel Dialogues. We will, of course, continue it, whether we do that over the summer months or certainly in the fall. We will see what's happened. But I want to thank all three of you as well for your dedication to Israel Dialogues, because I think as we can see by the reactions and people coming in, this is a very important conversation at an important time. So thank you all very much. I want to wish you all an early Shabbat Shalom. Chag Sameach Shavuot is coming on Sunday evening and Monday morning. Services are at those times, and please, you can take a look at the website for what's going on. And the other thing that I would just like to remind everybody is that the World Zionist Congress elections are starting in Canada in June 5th to 15th. I'm not going to try and explain that here. Hopefully, you've been getting some information about them, and you'll be getting more information over the course of the next week. It is very important for us to exercise that vote, and it gives us a chance in the diaspora to provide some kind of feedback and some kind of vote to the Jewish Parliament of the Jewish people, which is the World Zionist Congress. So please, if that's something new to you, please watch your mail and watch what we're talking about, because it is a very important part of Jewish diaspora life, for sure. And with that, thank you, everybody.
Thank you. And again, Gabby, always good, always great. Thank you.
My pleasure.
So, Gabby, this was, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was
Oh, yeah.
okay.
That was fine as far as I'm concerned. Yeah. Okay.
I think we covered a lot.
We covered a lot and nicely. Sort
Yeah,
of
and we avoided most of the journalism.
most of the journalism except at the very end.
Yeah,
And we had what? Well over 50 people, I think.
I think we had 58,
58, something like that at the peak.
so that's very good.
That's good. Okay.
Yeah,
So David,
very
we'll
good.
be in touch in the future again.
Yes,
Let me just
we're
get through this difficult week and the holiday and so on, and then
yeah,
we'll
of
see.
course. Yeah, we're going out to Vancouver the last 2 weeks of June to visit our son and daughter-in-law who just come back from 5 weeks in Israel
Okay.
and the little
Good.
ones. So if
Yeah.
I don't speak to you before, we'll speak to you
Uh,
when we get back. I
Good.
give
Let's do that.
Sarah
That-
our best wishes in this difficult time. Susie and
Right.
I say send that. We're also looking at whether it's going to be the fall or maybe next spring that we're going to come to Israel. We're finally going to be able to do it. So
Okay.
far, we've both been given a clean bill of health to travel, and
That's good.
so
That's the
we'll
most
try and
important
arrange.
thing. Yeah.
And you will let us know if you are going to come in the fall.
Yes, absolutely. So I'll have to make the decision sometime within June, within the next month. Otherwise, it's going to be too late logistically to organize everything.
Yeah.
So I'll let you know as soon as I make the decision.
And
Okay?
if you can, stay either stay for a couple of extra days or come in a couple of days early. I can send you an invitation on letterhead.
Good.
Even though I'm
Yeah, that might be
emeritus, I don't have
necessary.
anything beyond that, but I can
No,
do
that's
that.
fine. That's important for
Yeah,
releasing the research funds for travel and so on.
right, exactly.
Okay, David, thanks a lot. Regards to Susie.
Thank you,
And
you
have a
too.
good trip to Vancouver, and let me know when you get back.
Yes, of course. Okay, Gabby.
Good.
The
Bye,
best.
David. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.